For most of human history, we weren't alone. There was another kind of human walking this planet, hunting the same animals, sheltering from the same storms, looking up at the same night sky. They had larger brains than we do. They buried their dead. They made sophisticated tools, used pigments, and may have created art. They survived ice ages that should have wiped almost everything out.
And then, around 40,000 years ago, they vanished. They were the Neanderthals. And for a long time, we got them completely wrong. The first Neanderthal bones were found in 1856 in a cave in Germany's Neander Valley. The name itself just means Neander Valley. Scientists looked at the thick bones, the heavy brow ridges, the broad skull, and immediately decided they were looking at something primitive, brutish, barely intelligent. The image stuck, a knuckle-dragging, grunting cave creature. One of the most enduring misconceptions in all of science. And it was almost entirely wrong. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for roughly 400,000 years. Modern humans have been around for about 300,000. That means Neanderthals had already been surviving longer than our entire species has existed.
And they did it in some of the harshest conditions on Earth before we even showed up. They were built for the cold, stocky, powerful bodies, short limbs that conserved heat, barrel-shaped chests with enormous lung capacity, large noses that early reconstructions mocked, but were actually sophisticated heating and humidifying systems for freezing air. Evolution spent hundreds of thousands of years engineering them for survival in a brutal world. And they were not stupid. They made hafted tools, stone points fixed to wooden handles with birch tar they produced themselves. Making birch tar means controlling a fire at a precise temperature for a long time. That is planning. That is understanding cause and effect across time. They hunted large animals up close. Their bones show healed injuries that look a lot like those of modern rodeo riders, the kind you get from being too close to something big and angry.
They coordinated. They worked together. Some sites contain eagle talons with deliberate cut marks, suggesting they were strung as jewelry. Shells with pigment residue. And in a Spanish cave called La Pasiega, ladder-shaped markings dated to at least 65,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived in Europe. The only people there at the time were Neanderthals. They may have been making art long before we did. Perhaps most striking of all, they buried their dead. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal was found with what may have been flowers placed around the body. At other sites, bodies were carefully positioned, sometimes with objects nearby.
We can't know if this meant ritual or belief in something after death, but intentional burial itself says something profound. An awareness of death, a response to loss, a sense that the dead deserved more than being left where they fell. These are not the behaviors of creatures without inner lives. So what happened to them? Around 45,000 years ago, modern humans began moving into Europe in larger numbers. For several thousand years, the two groups shared the same landscapes, and then the Neanderthals were gone. For a long time, the story was told as simple replacement. Smarter, more advanced humans arrived and pushed the primitives aside.
The reality is more complicated and more interesting. Neanderthals were already living in small, fragile populations. Their effective numbers across an entire continent were often only in the low thousands. Many groups were relatively isolated. That made them vulnerable. A string of hard winters, a few bad hunting seasons, or a slight drop in fertility could start a slow decline that was hard to reverse. At the same time, the climate was swinging wildly. Rapid shifts between cold stadials and milder periods disrupted ecosystems and reduced the animals they depended on. Neanderthals had survived colder times before, but these late changes hit populations that were already stretched thin. Then modern humans arrived, not as a single invading army, but in successive waves. We were more numerous, more interconnected, and apparently better at maintaining larger social networks. We competed for the same resources. In some places, the overlap lasted thousands of years. In others, Neanderthal presence faded more quickly. And something else happened. We interbred. Genetic evidence shows multiple periods of contact. The children of those unions survived and had children of their own. Today, if your ancestry is outside Africa, you carry roughly 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA.
Some of those genes still influence our immune systems, skin, and how our bodies handle certain environments. But the gene flow appears largely one way in the final chapters. We find Neanderthal ancestry in early modern humans. We almost never find recent modern human ancestry in the last Neanderthals. One interpretation is that individuals from the smaller Neanderthal groups were gradually absorbed into larger Homo sapiens populations, more often than the reverse. In other words, they didn't simply get wiped out in a clean extinction. Part of them was folded into us. Their distinct lineage ended. Their genes did not.
This changes how we should see them. Not as failed humans, not as evolutionary dead ends swept aside by something superior. They were a different kind of human, intelligent, resilient, emotionally complex, and deeply adapted to a world more brutal than most of us can imagine. They endured for 400,000 years. They left traces in the genomes of billions of people alive today. They may have left marks on cave walls that we walked past for thousands of years without realizing who made them. And somewhere in your biology, right now, is a small piece of someone who once stood in an Ice Age cave, looked out at a frozen world, and survived.